Okay, I will formally kick us off then. This is EBCE's Community Solar Program second information session for prospective community sponsors. My name is Samantha Weaver. I think I've met many of you virtually in the past. For those who don't know, I'm the program manager for what's called the Connected Communities Program at EBCE. And this community solar program sort of falls under that umbrella. I'll just walk through our agenda quickly here. I'll do a quick welcome, then I'll give an overview of the program so far. I think many of you, if not all of you, attended the introductory session we held last month, which covered most of the program basics. I am going to recap some of that information, especially for those who weren't able to attend and who may be watching this later. The topic I plan to spend the most time on is agenda item number 3. So today I want to provide a lot more detail about the letters of commitment that project sponsors are required to provide. So I'll cover what that process looks like, how EBCE will evaluate those letters, and then what the CPUC requires the letters to contain. And then we'll jump into next steps and upcoming events. So again, welcome to all of you and thanks for your participation in this program so far. As with the presentation last time, the intended audience here is prospective community sponsors. So nonprofit organizations, local government agencies, or schools who might be interested in sponsoring one of these projects. I will be providing access to the slides both online on our website and via email after the presentation. And if we could hold questions until the end, there will be plenty of time for those. I think the presentation I'm about to give should take about 20 minutes. And feel free to ask your questions in the chat in advance if you'd rather not hold on to them in your mind, but I'll answer them all together at the end. Okay, so to give another quick overview for those who need it or weren't able to attend our previous session, this program was created by the CPUC in 2018, and the intention here is to promote development of renewable energy in communities that have historically been left behind, and clean infrastructure development especially. So it's intended for communities that are considered disadvantaged communities, and I'll talk about that more later on. The key here is that EBCE is pursuant to this decision, been given the opportunity to implement this program for our service area. The program will allow customers to receive 100% solar energy at a 20% discount. And EBCE has been allocated about 1.6 megawatts, and that's enough solar system capacity to serve about 450 customers in the East Bay and in the city of Tracy. This program requires a community sponsor, and that's part of why we're all here today. It'll also result in projects that are located within 5 miles of the community that they serve. So it's a very geographically focused program. So how does this work? The basic structure is that community-based organizations, which include local nonprofits, schools, or government agencies, partner with a solar project developer to sponsor the project on behalf of the residents in a disadvantaged community. As we discussed at the previous presentation in August, there are a lot of eligibility criteria for this program. I won't go as deeply into those details this time as I did then. If you have any questions about eligibility, either of the project, of the sponsor, or the residents who subscribe to the project, feel free to ask those at the end here. Again, a couple things worth noting is that projects can have more than one sponsor. So there's plenty of sponsorship opportunity to go around. The sponsor does not need to host the project on site. So they don't need to have a rooftop that can support solar. They don't need to have land available. Their role, as you'll see, is really about connecting the community and the developer, and as serving as a voice of the community as it relates to the project development process. There are benefits to this program that are similar for both residential customers and eligible sponsors. As I mentioned, customers who subscribe and sponsors receive 100% solar energy at a 20% discount. On the sponsorship side of things, one caveat is that sponsors can only receive the discount if they're headquartered or they're located in a disadvantaged community. Sponsors can receive funding as well for marketing, education, and outreach to educate and recruit customer subscribers. And as I mentioned earlier, the sponsor's role is really about helping project developers and the community come together. So that means you're helping to identify community suggested project sites. You're working with EBCE to conduct outreach and create interest, and you're providing a letter of commitment. And again, the letter of commitment is really the topic of the day today. And this is where I'll spend a little bit more time going into detail on what this should cover. To give just a high-level overview of what this letter is and how it fits into the process, I'll share some info here. So the CPUC requires that project developers obtain a letter of commitment from the project sponsor. So again, this program is really structured to kind of change the historic relationship between infrastructure developers and communities. And that's where the sponsor really comes in, is they're there to help ensure that the community supports and has a voice in the project development process. So the way this works is the prospective sponsor provides the letter to the project developer, and the developer includes the letter in their bid package to EBCE when they respond to our RFO. You can see this also depicted graphically below. The CPUC requires EBCE to structure this program as a competitive process, hence the RFO process here. Responses to the RFO are due December 10th, 2021. One question I've gotten about this program overall is there a deadline? In my head, December 10th is the deadline to be a sponsor. So if you want to formally make a commitment to sponsorship, that deadline is when that letter is due on December 10th. As I mentioned, this is all part of a competitive bid process called an RFO, which means what we will do on our end at EBCE is look at all of the bids we receive and evaluate them. As part of that evaluation, we will take the strength of community sponsors' letters into consideration. That said, the guidelines for the letters and our expectations around them are intentionally broad. I want to make sure that that's clear. And that's in order to accommodate varying approaches, different organizational capacity, and just to allow for flexibility for, frankly, CBOs, community-based organizations, to tell us how you think this sponsorship role should look. That said, letters of commitment must contain the CPUC required elements that I'll describe on the next slide. There are 4 of them. In addition, letters that demonstrate the following will be evaluated most highly on the EBCE side of things. So we're looking for letters that demonstrate clear outreach goals. Mostly we want to know what your goals are. We're not prescribing what they should be. We just want to know that they exist. Including outreach strategies for reaching multilingual customers or residents with limited access to the internet. We'd also like to see some demonstration of commitment from community members, and I'll talk a little bit about examples of what that could look like in a second here. I first want to describe the CPUC requirements. So as I said, there are 4 required elements that the letter must contain. The first is a demonstration of substantial interest from community members. The second is an estimated number of subscribers. The third is a preliminary outreach plan. And last but not least is any siting preferences or community suggested host sites. And now what I'll do is I'll walk through each of these 4 in a little bit more detail. So part 1 is demonstration of substantial interest of community members. An example of what this could look like, maybe as a sponsor or as a prospective sponsor, you collect signatures from community members. That would be a pandemic-friendly way potentially to do a lot of outreach around this. I'm thinking of this as like a sort of a petition signing. It could be a description of prior efforts to cite solar or other clean energy projects in communities. or simply it could be attestation by the sponsor who's acting on behalf of a community that such interest exists. So there's a broad spectrum of what it would mean to demonstrate interest. I think the takeaway here is, again, this is meant to be broad. Part 2 is an estimated number of subscribers. In my opinion, this is potentially the most challenging because it requires an estimating methodology. So what I've tried to do here is think about some ways that an organization might be able to think about how to estimate this number. And I think estimate is the key word. We're not going to hold anyone to the number provided. But one way to think about this is staff time based. In other words, an organization could estimate the number of subscribers they think they'll be able to reach based on things like organizational capacity or the number of staff you have to be dedicated to this effort. Maybe you only think you'll reach 50 people. Maybe it's only 25 people, and that's fine. Another way to think about estimating the number of subscribers is geography. So perhaps you're targeting some specific multifamily dwellings and you have an estimate of the number of folks who live in those units. Perhaps you're targeting a specific number of blocks or a census tract and you have an estimate of that, the number of customers there. And there are certainly other approaches. Again, these are just examples meant to be illustrative. One thing on this particular element that I wanted to mention is if you're looking for a way to sort of bound this number, it's worth noting that our solar program capacity allocation is, as I said before, about 1.6 megawatts, and we estimate that that can serve about 450 customers. So I view 450 as sort of the upper bound in terms of the estimated number I would expect to see. Third, and I think this is where CBO's expertise can really shine, is the CPUC requires a preliminary plan to conduct outreach and to recruit subscribers. So some examples of what this could look like. Again, this isn't meant to be prescriptive. It's just meant to sort of get people thinking. An outreach plan might describe the target audience, the marketing strategies you intend to use, outreach goals and guiding principles, and any plans for evaluating or tracking your outreach efforts. In addition, inclusion of an estimated budget for outreach is helpful. It's certainly not required. The reason I say it's helpful is that EBCE has program funding to provide to community-based organizations for outreach. And it's just helpful for our budgeting purposes to know roughly what organizations might be thinking. Again, it's not a requirement, but something that helps us with our budget forecasting process every year for this program. There are a couple of resources I want to mention that tie in directly to this requirement and that I think might just be helpful for you all as you think about this part of the letter. The first is that at EBCE, when we applied to administer this program, we filed with the CPUC a preliminary community solar marketing, education, and outreach plan. I don't have an easily linkable version of this document, but it is publicly available. And if you'd like a copy, I'm happy to send that to you via email. I've listed my email on the slide. Second resource is we've created a map of disadvantaged communities in our service area. And it's just using sort of a Google map. And I've provided a link to that here. And that way you can type in an address and see whether it's in a disadvantaged community and kind of move around the map and look at other things. And then last but not least, we also have a list of the disadvantaged community census tracts in our service area. The list includes the census tract number, the city, as well as the zip code. And I think the total population in the census tract. So if that's helpful, that's also linked here on this slide. All right, last but not least, the fourth component of the commitment letter is citing preferences, including community suggested host sites. And here we're really just looking for verification that the community supports the chosen project site. One potential resource or tool we have available for this is we've also created a Google Earth-based map file that overlays disadvantaged communities, as well as something called the Solar Siting Survey for Alameda County. This survey was conducted by an organization called Clean Coalition on behalf of EBCE, not as part of this community solar effort, but as part of our local development business plan process that was undertaken when EBCE first started. So it's just a resource we have on hand that we wanted to provide because it may be relevant for this effort. And that is can be found on our website, and it's also linked here. Okay, so that covers the commitment letters. That's a lot of information. As I said, I'm always available to answer questions. Maybe before I go into next steps, if any of you would like to meet with me individually to walk through these tools, I'm happy to do that. So my email address is at the end of this slide deck. Please feel free to reach out. In terms of next steps, so if you're interested in sponsoring and this hasn't scared you away, there are 3 things I recommend doing. The first is begin connecting with solar project developers. And EBCE is here to help you do that. One way to do that is to fill out our online sponsor interest form so that we can feature your organization on our website as a potential sponsor for developers to find. I've had 5 folks reach out to me about this, and I'm waiting for their approval of the logo that I plan to include on the website. Once I get that, those will all appear on our website soon. The second item related to this is that on September 28th, we'll be hosting a virtual matchmaking event for potential sponsors and developers to meet and learn about each other's plans in the works so far, to the extent that those exist. Sorry, that's my dog. Sorry, I'm just muting while my dog is barking. The second thing you can do if you're interested in sponsoring is to begin thinking about letters of commitment. So I just walked through in some detail what those letters need to include. And those are something that, as I've said, those are due December 10th. So now is really the time to start thinking about what those letters might look like for your organization. Last but not least, stay up to date on RFO activities. I think I illustrated before that there's a major tie-in between the sponsor's role and the project development process. So it may be helpful to stay up to date on what's happening there. The best way to do that is to join our mailing list. And I've included a link where you can do that on this slide. Some upcoming events for everyone to be aware of. Friday, September 24th, we'll host an RFO webinar. The intended audience for this is really project developers, but again, given the overlapping roles, I think it's relevant for project sponsors as well. So you're certainly invited to attend. And there's a link where you can register posted here on this slide. On Tuesday, September 28th, will be the matchmaking event I mentioned. And then the following month in October will be our 3rd and I think final sponsor info session. Additional resources or questions, please feel free to email me. I'm Sam Weaver and my email address is sweaver@ebce.org. For more information on the solar program itself, I've included a link to our website. I've also included a link to the RFO website, which is separate. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll stop recording at this time. And what I'll do after this is compile a list of all the questions I've received so far into a frequently asked questions document that we post on our website. And that's just to make sure everyone has sort of the same information publicly available.